your flesh and blood.
Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week. Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, and we have a special guest who is with us again to talk about, well, ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to have the kids leave the room for this one. We're going to have the sex talk, but not quite what you think. My guest here on the program today is Dr. Stephen Furlich, and it's great to have you back here on the program to talk about one of the subjects, one of 2 or 3 that you try to stay away from. But it seems to me the more we stay away from these subjects, the more difficult our lives are, our society, our civilization is. I mean, I take a look, for example, at the way things are done in other native countries, other European countries, when it comes to death and dying. And a lot of people refer to the United States and its attitudes towards sex as prudish, in spite of the, and this is not part of the conversation, but in spite of the proliferation of, how do I want to put this, very suggestive materials on the internet as well as elsewhere. Well, we're going to talk here today, Doctor, about communicating and how the biological sex influences gender communications. Now, this is rather interesting because I've had many people on this program who they give all kinds of different suggestions on how we can communicate. And we talk about body language and as well as the words that we use. So where in this whole mix of trying to communicate with one another, whether it's opposite or same sex, does this whole aspect of biology come into play?
And that's a good question. So my starting point always is, where does all communication begin? It begins in the brain. So that's a biological component right there. And then everyone pretty much starts off on the same track from conception, what we're usually as female at conception. And we start to develop in that track. Then after about 4 months after conception, that's when the sex hormones start to kick in and differentiate biological males from biological females. And those sex hormones, the androgens, the male sex hormones that we think of, testosterone and the estrogens, keep continuing for the female, influences the brain structural differences. And some of these differences are in the areas that are responsible for communication. So now you can analyze a human brain, look at the structure, and with over 90% accuracy, predict if it's male or female. You can also have people do the exact same task, listen to something, communicate about something, look at something, and you could differentiate based upon the activations in the brain, if it's male or female, because it's going to activate different areas and different intensities as well. So these differences of not only structure and activation differences influences our social behaviors. So the way that we perceive, the way that we understand, our emotions, topics communicated, the words used, interest, all those things are influenced by it.
You've already said something that I have tried to elicit in people in terms of their understanding. And I believe it, I remember hearing about what you just said in biology class in either grade school or high school. I wish I could remember
Okay.
specifically when. And that had to do with the fact that every human being who has ever existed started out as a female.
Okay.
And that's scientifically verifiable, correct?
Yes. So it's much easier to make a female than it is a male. Those male typical hormones are very intense on the body, and not nearly as many males make it to birth as females do. But also, talk to some of the people around you, some of the mothers who are pregnant with a boy, with a male, their actual testosterone levels are higher than if it's with a girl. So it increases it because of the baby. The baby's fluids increases the testosterone levels of the mother.
Mm.
So if you were to shake hands with the mother, they found out that they have a stronger handshake grip if they're pregnant with a boy than if they are pregnant with a girl. And then even I don't know how long, but at least right after birth, her testosterone levels stay elevated to some degree.
Mm. Now, I know this next question, I don't think we can really answer. It's one of those why. Do we have any idea why we start out as females and then the information in the DNA determines, let's make this one a male. Nah, let's leave this one a female. Is there an answer to that question, or is that one of those ones that we'll have to wait until we get to the other side and are able to communicate with the divine, the creator, if you will?
As is everything that's complicated in life, it's both. So we could probably do an educated guess, and probably the divine has the final answer and it's more precise. So
Mhm.
if you want me to take an educated guess, I probably could.
Well, certainly I'm open to any suggestions. The frustration for me is, and granted this isn't necessarily the direction of our conversation, but as we all both know, there's a lot of controversy over this whole gender issue, and
Mhm.
that some people say that gender is fluid. And I've even heard this said of many of my metaphysical and spiritual guests that there is no gender when it comes to the soul, that we're just part of the divine, if you will. We're part of the whole, and so on and so forth. We come from the one and we will return to the one, as they say. Or I think it was it Jung, the philosopher, I guess, or the therapist, what have you, who said that there's only one mind, one universal mind, and we're all part of it. But there is no gender. And this business of gender fluidity, even that conversation is sort of moot, because if there's only gender in the material world, this is all temporary anyway. So what difference does it make what you choose to call yourself or associate with? Can you talk to that
I
at all, or is that a far afield?
uh both. I could talk about it,
We're
and
on
it
a
is a
roll.
far field.
go go
I
ahead.
see it as different layers. So
Okay.
maybe there is, truth to it that deep down, spiritually, our soul, maybe there is commonality with that, our beliefs, our morals, our connection to the creator, things like that. But maybe it's our behaviors and the way that we process the information that is more open to gender differences based upon our social interactions. So maybe it is that's what's deep down is consistent that everyone shares, but then maybe how we express it, how we understand other people, and how we relate to other people, that's when the gender comes into play. Because let me take, for example, what's been consistently found over and over, and I laid this out in my nonverbal epiphany book, is that females are superior from the early age with nonverbal communication. So those social behaviors, they understand and empathize with other people much more accurately, and that's based upon their biological makeup that they have. That they have all five senses they're superior in, so they can see more detail, more color with their eyes. They can hear more different tones, stronger nuances of taste and smell. Also more sensitive to touch as well. So those are just things that you just can't say are exactly equal or the same between males or females. And I don't think we should ignore that as well, because when a male communicates to a female, she's going to have more information to go off of and read more deeper into it. And he is just going to have a more literal understanding of it. So I think it is short-sighted to just continue or dismiss all of it altogether, and it's probably short-sighted to say, that everything's totally different as well. I see it as everyone is on different continuums, on different types of factors, whether it's nonverbal ability or whatever. And maybe males are on this side, not as well as understanding. Females are on that side. Our experiences can move us to some degree, but usually we can't flip. So again, everything gets more on continuum and less so of exclusive types of categories.
We're talking with Dr. Stephen Furlich, and we're talking about, we're actually having the sex talk, how biological sex influences gender communication differences throughout life's stages. And we'll continue that conversation as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan with Dr. Stephen Furlich. And Doctor, I want to thank you for joining us, but also I want to ask you this next question in regards to what you've just stated. So would I be implying that part of or maybe the sole reason why girls develop faster, if you will, than boys, or females develop faster than males, does it have to do with the fact that they started out as a female, so they don't have to make the transition to male based upon the DNA and so on and so forth, and the rearranging or adding of the Y chromosome versus staying, what is it, two X's and X and a Y? Okay. I remember just enough of biology to get myself in trouble. But is that
Me and
maybe
you have
part
a
of the reason?
Y.
What's that?
Me and you have a Y.
So is that part of the reason?
So women, they have an X, and then it's up to the male. Do we give them a Y or do we give them an X? So I would say that what you're inferring to some degree, is correct in terms of that estrogen actually helps us language abilities and social abilities and social understanding. So females tend to be from an early age better with language ability and understanding other people. They're just superior social creatures. So I think that's probably why they tend to mature much quicker and at a higher age than the same age as a boy, because they have a better social understanding and they have better social skills as well. And estrogen helps that, as well as their brain structure. They have more connections across both hemispheres. So that allows her to engage in the conversation while analyzing the other person's nonverbal behaviors at the same time.
Is there also the same biological component when we start talking about same-sex relationships and one of the partners has more of a feminine component than the other, and the other has much more of a male dominant type of a structure, whether it's two males or two females? One of them seems to have sort of the mother instinct or a nurturing aspect, and the other has the doer, the fixer, the hunter gatherer aspect to them. And yet, you wouldn't expect it in females that they'd have that hunter gatherer, and you wouldn't expect the nurturer in males. Is that also a component? Is there something that is in the DNA, or is it something about the chromosomes? What is it that we do understand about that dynamic?
So with the same sex types of relationships, a lot of the research tends to indicate that you find what you would expect of that particular biological sex, but maybe it's a shift to some degree on the continuum. So maybe it would be less masculine that or whatever, but still what you would think of as a male in that type of relationship, and still in that type of social behaviors as well. Same thing with the females as well. So again, on the continuum, and not necessarily that you reverse or you flip over as what you may expect. So I think that does bring us back to biology. And maybe if you do have lower levels of testosterone, then it does make it, less of aggression. Or if you do have higher levels, then it does bring more aggression. But again, it still, to the most part, stays within what you would normally expect, just moves it on the continuum to a farther degree.
And there's one other aspect I want to bring up when it comes to the biology, as far as sometimes self-communication. I remember years ago when I would hear and read about people who wanted to have cosmetic surgery, specifically women, although today here in the 21st century, men are having it too. And I used to think, maybe you should go to therapy and get some help and guidance before you start, you know, rearranging the musculoskeletal structure of your body, and this might also apply to this whole conversation regarding transgender and so forth. But I then was awakened, if you will, to the understanding that in most I should say many individuals who want to have their nose maybe shortened or whatever the attributes are they want to have modified. There is a psychological reason, and that if they have this change, they are going to feel more confident. They're going to have a greater sense of self-being and so on and so forth. They're going to like themselves a lot better. And in many cases, that's exactly what happens. So I thought, well, what's wrong with cosmetic surgery? If it helps you to feel better about yourself, then maybe you're going to be able to go out and, let's say, live your life's purpose, fulfill your dreams, and so forth, and not get stuck in the constantly looking in the mirror and going, I wish I could change. I wish I could fix this, fix that, and on and on and on. And I have to wonder if maybe the same thing might be true. And I don't know where we would do the age cutoff here, but regardless, seems to me the same issue is true with the whole the gender issue, transgender issue. An individual does not feel comfortable in the gender body that they're in, despite the fact that those are the chromosomes, that's the DNA they've been given, and they want to be the other sex. Uh, do we see that as a dynamic in that respect as well? That it is a psychological issue, and again, maybe we'll have the cutoff age at 18 and above right now, because anybody younger than that, really, their brains haven't developed. I mean, we have all that wonderful biology. Is that a part of the dynamic as well in trying to determine where do I fit in my world and in society?
And that's a good point. So my perspective on that is that the person who's going to undergo the surgery needs to be able to make an informed decision, and there's risk involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think that, just like you said, under 18, how's a child going to understand all the risks that are involved in it? So just a few things to go over. Brain synapses, they tend to change and have different types of reactions, emotions, as hormones change, either naturally or artificially. So if you start tinkering around artificially changing those, then your brain synapses and your emotions are going to change as well. Increase in testosterone has been found to decrease gray matter in the Broca's area of the brain, which is responsible for language ability. So if you start increasing testosterone, then what's it going to do to someone's language ability? Same thing with testosterone and spatial ability. They have found, and this is usually what I'm referring to as men who are going through prostate types of treatments.
Mm-hmm.
What they do to treat that is they lower their testosterone levels artificially, and that's been found to hurt their spatial ability. So and also there's other types of risk as well. Cardiovascular disease, prostate cancer, hormone suppression, other types of things as well. So I guess the bottom line with that is trying to have some sort of balance in terms of when can you make a fully informed consent of making these types of changes to your own body. I don't think you do it as an adolescent or as a child.
Yeah. And even after you've reached the age of consent, shall we say, then we'll put the cutoff here on this program at 18, and you've gotten past that point, your 20s or you're in your 30s and so forth. And we take a look at people like a Bruce Jenner, who said, I'm a female. I feel like a female. And to me, it goes along the same lines as when I reached 200 pounds, all right, physically. It was not the weight that bothered me. It was 200. That's not my number. That and I'm now hovering after all the last few years. I'm hovering around 180. I'm quite comfortable. Thank you very much. 200 is not my number. And it's not healthy either, but that aside. And I didn't go after diets or anything like that. I had some other issues that helped me to lose the weight. But to me, it seems like the same kind of thing, that if a person doesn't feel comfortable in their own skin, just like, you know what, I don't feel comfortable living in Phoenix. I'm going to move. I don't feel comfortable for working for this radio station. I'm going to find another job. I don't feel comfortable living with this person. I'm going to find someone else, or I'm going to go solo from here on out. And the list of choices that we make goes on. And then we're going to get into the whole aspect of communication as well in a moment. But this whole psychological dynamic that exists when we're trying to, again, trying to figure out where we fit in, because isn't that kind of what we're all trying to do, is trying to find our place in our families, in our schools, our workplace, our churches, our synagogue, wherever it is that we associate. We're just trying to find a place to belong, right?
I think one of the things that needs to be implemented more is just more caution. Not to say that you shouldn't do it, but not to make that the first choice or the first option. Just
Right.
like you talked about moving or changing jobs, those things are a bit less permanent on your overall being the rest of your life,
Yeah.
as opposed to if you're going to have some sort of, transition types of surgery. So I think it as more of the bottom of the list of an option to explore. And I think there's calls into question some of the medical professionals and what's their motives. So,
Yeah.
some of the pharmaceutical companies have been criticized as to trying to promote transitions early on, especially with children, because then they have lifelong someone dependent upon their products.
Yeah. Yeah. I will tell you one final thing here in this regard, and then we're going to move on to the sex talk, and we're going to get into the conversational or communicative aspects of this. When I went through school, I graduated from high school in 1978. And it was only a year or two after that, and maybe it started before that, but I wasn't really aware of it. When they started talking about the way I describe this, my observation is trying to normalize the males and females in the classroom. But when I was going through school, grade school and high school, and learning in biology, as I did about how we all start out as female, I also learned that number one, girls, they develop faster as far as their brains in particular. Boys are high energy. They're kind of bouncing off the walls and so forth. That's just the way boys are. Males are that way. And now, or I should say then in the late 70s into the 80s, they wanted to start prescribing different medications like Ritalin to suppress those aspects, to normalize everybody. And I thought, wait a minute, but you just told me that this is the way boys and girls are. Don't you think maybe you should change your teaching methods or what have you within the school rather than giving them drugs? And then I have to ask the question, which is probably more rhetorical. How much damage have those drugs, those chemicals done on our biology, on our chromosomes and our DNA to where now maybe, and I'm just throwing this out there. I mean, this is a wild assertion here that maybe that's now why we're dealing with the transgender issue because we didn't really know what those drugs would really do long term to the body any more than we really know what most, like when aspartame came on the market back in the early 80s. We didn't know the long-term effects. And I checked with the funeral director, said, I asked him, I said, well, what's changed in your industry? He says, I'm using less embalming fluid. I says, well, why is that? It was because from a scientific perspective, aspartame turns into to formaldehyde, embalming fluid in the body, and we're embalming ourselves as we go. So I have to wonder if maybe some of these medications, and then this conversation about ADHD and all of these different attention deficit things and the medications. And I don't know that there is a corollary. I don't know if any studies have been done in that regard, but it just seems as though every time we try to fix something with a medication, we create a new problem.
That's a good point. And one of the things that I have a section on in my nonverbal epiphany book is epigenetics. So the things that we experience ourselves, what we experience ourselves, doesn't change our DNA, but it influences how our DNA is expressed when we reproduce. So there's a lot of research out there that heavily supports how if you are obese when you conceive a child, then that's going to influence the way that your DNA is expressed in that child if you're compared to if you're not obese. So the things that you participate in and experience is going to influence how your DNA is expressed differently at conception with the child itself. So how it's expressed in the child. So I think you are onto something, but there's a lot of powerful industries out there that make a lot of money off of prescribing Ritalin and stuff like that. So who's going to go up against them?
Well, I mean, you have a good point. Who's going to do that? And the question is, the answer is somebody's got to stand up and say enough is enough. But we can't do a knee-jerk reaction. I can tell you that I have actually heard of people who, after being put on opioids, for example, and they're told, oh, no, you can't get off of them by yourself. It's going to take a long time and so on and so forth. I know personally of people who have gotten off after long-term usage. They've gotten off of the opioids by themselves. No treatment program, no, what do they call those places you go, rehab centers, none of that. They just gradually reduced the dosage and they're done with that. So I find it fascinating. We're talking with Dr. Stephen Furlich about his work and sex talk, and it is how biological sex influences gender communication differences throughout life's stages. We'll continue that as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan along with Stephen Furlich, and Doctor, tell me, you've mentioned a couple of books. We've got Sex Talk, which, by the way, is that available now in Audible?
Yes, through Amazon. Yes.
Give us a bibliography of, if you will, of the works that you have published that are available that people can find out more about in your, especially your area of expertise in terms of communications.
Okay, so we have the Sex Talk book, which is on Amazon, How Biological Sex Influences Gender Communication Differences Throughout Life Stages. Then also Nonverbal Epiphany, Steps to Improve Your Nonverbal Communication is also available on Amazon. And what I have different chapters that cover different topics. And at the end of each chapter, I have an activity. So it's not that you just only learn information, but you apply it. So how can you improve your skills you improve your skills by doing based upon an informed type of background as well. So I'm proud of that. I also am a contributor for Psychology Today, and I have several articles on that website. And all you have to do is just go to their website and then search my last name, Furlich, Furlich. And I have some on body language. I just had one come out yesterday, and I tried to do it that was timely for Valentine's coming up. So
Ah,
the title of that article is Community Biology of Sexual Arousal. So I go into how everything that we do socially is interconnected between our biology and our communication, and how men or women are sexually aroused differently based upon those social factors.
so there aren't the stereotypicals where men are stimulated visually and women auditorially. It varies in different ways.
Those stereotypes are supported by research, but also I go into more of some of the science as well, such as oxytocin levels, testosterone, estrogen, um,
Hmm.
uh, dopamine.
Yeah. And I'm curious
How our
about one other attribute here in this regard to what you've just sort of broached a little bit here, and that is how our drives change as we move through the middle and end stages in our 60s, 70s, 80s. I know there are some women out there that their drive continues on and sometimes maybe up until their death. And sometimes that may even cause their death. I've heard, or a guy has a heart attack. But I've also heard it said too that it's not abnormal to for your drive to decrease. Now, this is of course assuming you're not taking, 8 or 10 different medications for all kinds of other issues. You're fairly healthy and so forth, and that there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that you're maybe for a man, he's not producing the testosterone. That doesn't mean that he needs to start taking it. Vice versa, a woman, the estrogen levels lower doesn't mean she necessarily needs to start taking it. It's just it's part of the chemistry, our biology, right?
Those are all good points. So with the men, we'll start there because we are much simpler creatures. Adult males typically have around 20 times more, so not 20%, but 20 times more testosterone than adult females. And our testosterone levels start to decrease at around age 20. And testosterone is highly linked to our sex drive, our sexual arousal, interest, stuff like that. Um, Also, what needs to be considered are some of the things that we talked about previously as well.
Mhm.
So, exercise, extremely intense exercise can lead to sexual dysfunction, but certain types of foods and certain types of exercises, depending upon what they are, can either increase or decrease our testosterone levels. So, just one of the things that you alluded to, not that we necessarily have to artificially change our testosterone levels, but through what we do on a day-to-day basis with our exercise and our food can increase or decrease our yes, as you said, after about age 20, highly rated testosterone from males, testosterone levels and sex drive, and it starts to decrease after age 20.
Mm.
For females, much more complicated. So usually late 30s, early 40s, that's when their estrogen starts to decrease. And with females, I'll say this and then give one caveat. So in all mammals, female mammals, estrogen has been found to influence sex drive and sexual interest. However, what has been found in a little bit of research is artificially extreme higher levels of artificial testosterone being taken by a woman has been found to increase their sexual interest, sex drive.
Mm-hmm.
Where a controversy comes into play is it the testosterone doing it, or is it the testosterone that's then converted into estrogen, and it's that estrogen that's doing it? And that's sort of where I come down on is I think it's still the estrogen that's doing it for females. Here's something that probably everyone or most people know someone that this applies to. So the majority of people over age 50 who file for divorce are women. And again, like we already talked about, the estrogen starts to decrease after age 40. So it's probably not coincidental that as she starts to go through that a change in her life, going to a different phase, that's going to change to the relationship. And if the male doesn't pick on what needs to be adapted, and I think that's a problem with us males a lot of times, is we become too complacent.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't have something that's blatantly in front of us, that's a problem, then everything must be going well and there's nothing wrong. Whereas she sees all the nuances because it's easier for her to process relationship information. And it probably just builds and builds and builds. And then eventually they just have enough and they walk away as their estrogen starts to decrease. They're no longer at the childbearing age, this, that, and the other. One of the things with women themselves is that as during their cycles, as they near ovulation, their estrogen starts to increase. So their sexual desires start to increase. And conveniently, men find women's faces more attractive when they have those higher levels of estrogen when they start to approach that ovulation during the month. And that women are more in their fertile type of stage. They focus more in on sexual desire, whereas when their estrogen decreases during the same within the same month, then they focus more on calorie intake. So he needs to be aware of that. That if she's not in a sexual type of mood, it may not necessarily be him personally. Maybe within the fluctuations of estrogen within that month, focus in on sexual interest or focus in on calorie intake.
Mm. Yeah, one of the things that strikes me paradoxical for me as I observe and I hear different things from people, obviously one of the comments that, our society is too sexualized, we're always talking about sex, 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 and then women dress this way and men dress that way and women do this and do that and do the other thing. And I was watching the Grammys and I was watching the outfits specifically that the women were wearing. And my observation is this: the way we were designed as males and females, we males, because we are predominantly visually oriented, we are drawn to women who dress provocatively, who dress sexually, who dress, minimally, and so on and so forth. And the paradox that I find is men are criticized for their quote unquote sexualization of women, objectifying them, and so forth. Even if, we aren't running a magazine or making films or anything. It's just you and me, Steve and Richard. We're walking down the street and we see this beautiful woman. Now, my tack has been for decades. If she's in front of me and I observe her, I may make a mental note. Well, that's a beautiful woman. She has beautiful this, that, and the other thing. And once she goes past, I keep my eyes forward. Because if I haven't gotten my fill, that's too bad. Because when you turn around and you start, now you're ogling. Now you are objectifying. But the paradox is, this is the way we men were created, to be that way. Just and using that example that you just did in terms of the period of ovulation and those types of things. And it's like, wait a minute, but that's the way we were designed. Why are we being criticized for being this way? And the same thing for women on the other side, because of the way that they observe men, and and so on and so forth. Don't criticize them. And then that whole if it's an older woman and a younger man, it's perfectly okay. But if it's an older man and it's a younger woman, oh, he's a dirty old man. Those kinds of unfortunate ways of doing it. So it's almost as if, um, oh, Steve, oh, that's two. You have two arms. How come? What's the problem? Because in a manner of speaking, your two arms are part of who you are, just as the way you see the opposite sex, or for those who are into the same sex, it's the same thing. Your object, because to me, this is sort of where the communications can break down, and why women at large, in some cases, sometimes they're afraid to look someone in the eye, a male in the eye, as they're walking through the mall or walking down the street, because of the potential innuendo and so on and so on and so forth. Your thoughts?
I agree with that, that there is a biological ingrained instinctual within us that for some of it you just can't control. So consistently, it's been found for decades. If with males seeing an attractive female, our pupils dilate. So our pupils dilate automatically. How can you control that? So all that is trying to take in more visual information of what we see because that's something that we like. So, I mean, biologically, instinctually, you can't really control your pupil dilations. So, evolutionary, what are we doing? Evolutionary, we always put a high priority on the female physical attributes because it's ingrained with us that she needs to be healthy enough to reproduce, to give a healthy offspring, and to be healthy enough to stay around to help raise that offspring as well. And one of the things that you brought up, and this is just my opinion, is how is it one's wrong and the other isn't in terms of females? They're always, not always, but a high priority for them is what's the male's resources, what's their earning potential, what type of job or status or resources do they have? So why is that okay to evaluate or analyze? But then for what we have instinctually, looking at physical attributes, why is that wrong? So
Mm-hmm.
for her, she wants someone who's stable enough and provide resources for her and the offspring and protection. And for us, we want healthy offspring. So it complements each other. And I don't see why one has to be wrong and the other is okay.
Yeah. A thought just occurred to me in the religious realm. I was born and raised Catholic, and of course heard the edict, be fruitful and multiply. And my family, my mother and father, they had six kids, four girls and two boys. What are the odds? But it's like, okay, if that's the main purpose for the sexual act, if you will, then there shouldn't be any more conversation about any of this. But it's like I said, I was watching the Grammys, and there was a part of me that was going, you understand that because of the way you are dressing, there are going to be people who are going to be looking at you and thinking about and drooling and this and that and the other, and then you wonder why. Now, there are two very distinct differences here. Number one is, if all I'm doing is watching, if all I'm doing is keeping it in here, then I'm fine. The moment it starts to get tactile in any way, without permission, without consent, that's where the line is. And I think that is probably the biggest problem we have in this society. I know it's not just here in America, but elsewhere as well. Um, that we need to learn that, yes, this is the way we males are, and for women, this is the way we females are, and neither is right or wrong. It's just the way we are, and we have control. We can choose to behave in a civilized, shall we say, civilized manner. And which is, I know there have been civilizations down through the centuries that have been less than what we would consider civilized. I get that, but Here we are. This is where we live. This is our process. And Dr. Stephen Furlich is my guest. We're having the sex talk, and we're doing that here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan here on the program that brings you new paradigms for a new world. I just got a note from someone who said, Richard, keep bringing those new paradigms for a new world. And it seems to me that in some instances, not all, but in some, and maybe even this conversation, sometimes some of the old ways of doing things aren't necessarily bad. And I'm not talking about going back to the way it was in the 50s or anything like that. But in terms of going back to a scientific basis for who and what we are, is that part of the impetus behind sex talk?
Yes, so that's one of the things that I want to bring awareness to is that we need to have more empathy and understanding from the other person's perspective and what their natural abilities are based upon biological sex. So, for example, when it comes to conversations, um, verbally, females are superior at early age with language abilities. They can read, they can write, they outperform as early as grade 4. Males tend to have more speech disorders. Males tend to have more visual connections, females more auditory. Females have larger areas in Brodmann's areas 4 and 4 and 45, which is 20% larger and responsible for verbal fluency, verbal memory. Brain activation. So more of her overall brain is activated when she verbally communicates. For us males, our left side is activated for language, and our right side is activated for emotion. So we're much more compartmentalized. So it's much easier for her to talk about the current topic and then tie in past experiences and then emotion as well. With us males, we're much more compartmentalized. One, we don't have as many connections to each of those different areas, and those communication areas are smaller for us. So we could talk about the current topic or the emotion or past experiences, but trying to expect us to do all three at the same time is not realistic. So what we need to understand is when she ties in all these different details and emotion and past experiences together, she's not unfocused. That's just what makes sense to her, tying all things together. What
Mhm.
she needs to understand is that it's more difficult for us to communicate about our emotions in the past and the current topic, and that we're not emotionally removed. It's still important to us, and it's just not, we're not as equipped to do it. So we're going to be much more literal in our communication, and she needs to be careful not to overanalyze, and he needs to try not to oversimplify.
Mm. I have to wonder too, Doctor, if maybe this whole conversation surrounding, for example, equal rights. I'm still befuddled by the concept that a company would hire a male and a female to do exactly the same job and pay them differently. Prefer specifically the female gets paid less. That doesn't make any sense to me. But that aside, one of the things that is fascinating to me about the dynamics, and having grown up in a household, I'd say dominated by estrogen, with 5 females and only 3 males, we still got along. We still functioned as a family. Yeah, we had our little tiffs every so often, but for the most part, there was never, as far as I'm aware, there was never any estrangement, not between me and my siblings or my parents, and as far as I know, not between my other siblings and themselves and our parents. So it was rather a unique situation. But I think what growing up in that environment for me did was it gave me a greater appreciation in that respect. Even though I didn't fully understand all of the aspects, the dynamics you've described here on the program in terms of the differences, um, they were individuals even before they were female or sisters, if you will. And I just think that, boy, we would be so much. Sometimes I wonder, and I'll ask your opinion on this. You think maybe that, we would be a heck of a lot further along if we'd worked a little bit more on the old communication skills, decades ago, instead of where we are today. Not just the polarized aspects, from that standpoint, but just in terms of sometimes our inability to communicate. I mean, to get to not just to get our point across, but to really be heard, not understood, to be heard. Because that's a big issue today is, Steve, do you hear me? Do you really hear me?
Uh-huh. So the first point that you brought up, and this is something that I think should be clarified, the gender pay gap.
Hmm.
So it's quite popular out there, and everyone recites it. 78 cents to every dollar. That's what a woman's being paid. But I question that. I'm not exactly sure how if there is gender pay gap out there still, and if so, what it is. So
Hmm.
that statistic, as far as I understand, is based upon the salaries overall of
Hmm.
all males and all females.
Hmm.
And oftentimes, males tend to work more hours, and there tends to be different professions that we go into. And the male professions tend to pay more computer science than it does for a K-12 teacher. So I think that comes into play as well. We have laws that outlaw it. So how can you still do it and still be legal to do that? So I think the gender pay gap has more to do with the professions that we choose to go into and less so of doing the same job and just paying females less. If
Hmm.
that were the case and was accepted, then everyone should just open up their own company and just hire females since you could pay them less. You would save a lot of
Yeah, exactly.
money.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I cannot say that I ever had any of my sisters ever come home from whatever job they were doing, or ever share that. Oh yeah, I don't get paid as much as my male counterpart. And they made their own ways. Very very strong women, who have accomplished so much, and actually accomplished a whole lot more in the relationship area because they're still with the same man they started with, whereas my brother and I, yeah, we I've been through the changing of the partners once, never to do it again. My brother's done it a couple times, but he is, he's having a great time in his retirement, and I think that's real important for all of us to remember that we're all different. And that's okay. It's okay to be different. And we need to accept that reality as well. Stephen Furlich is my guest, Dr. Stephen Furlich, and he's got a couple of really cool books. So both of them are available. I was actually looking at the Amazon site, and I love the Nonverbal Epiphany Steps to Improve Your Nonverbal Communications, as well as Sex Talk, How Biological Sex Influences Gender Communication Differences Through Life's Stages, as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, and we're talking with Dr. Stephen Furlich, and it's great to have you back again here on the program. It was back in October 2025, the last time we talked, and that was an extraordinary conversation. And certainly there's always much more to talk about. And I would like to have you back to talk about that whole nonverbal epiphany, in terms of this aspect of understanding when someone is maintaining a particular posture, that it says an awful lot. I had a friend, she's since passed away, but she used to do face analysis, where depending upon the spread of your eyes between, of and the nose, and the angle of the eyes and the shape of the nose and the mouth and the this and that, it sort of determined, in one sense, the type of personality you have and so forth. And it's fascinating to me, all of these different modalities. In this case, the body language, and I know that they've done that over the years. For example, with politicians, and they'll say, "Oh, well, he's lying because," and here are the reasons why: one, two, three, four, five. Sometimes it's in the speech patterns. I've even heard that when an individual is sort of stuttering through what they're trying to present, you start to question whether or not they're telling you the truth because they're searching for, or maybe they're not telling you the truth. They're actually lying, and they're having to try to remember, okay, well, what was the lie that I told? Whereas if you're telling the truth, you don't have to remember because it's always right there, that kind of thing. Also, volume. and sometimes the actual vocabulary that you're using. So that is outside of the realms, of course, of the nonverbal epiphany. But I'd love to have you back to maybe talk on that realm of understanding not just others' body language, but our own. And I'll tell you one that I learned very early on in my career. I was going through a personal growth program, and one of the things they taught us was what's called open body posture. Both feet on the floor, hands on the respective knees, left hand, left knee, right hand, right knee. And that's how you, because now you are open to receiving what's being said. You're open to really hearing. Now, you still have the internal filters. That's a whole nother subject in and of itself. But that's just
That's a
one.
good,
Yeah.
and
Go ahead.
that's one of my principles I have in my book is that oftentimes we think of our nonverbal behaviors as reactions to what's going on in the conversation, whatever else. But our nonverbal behaviors actually create our emotions as well. So just like you talked about, our nonverbal behaviors of our posture can create how well we listen. One of the things that really helps to illustrate this is Cuddy, Cuddy is her last name, and she writes and talks about the power pose. And she had two different conditions, one before an interview, and one is without the people who are conducting the interview seeing this. They didn't see who did which one or the other, but they had people who just walked in and did their normal interview. And the second condition, they did the power pose without the people seeing them prior to the interview. And they rated the people who did the power pose prior to the interview as more credible and more likely to get the job. So what the power pose is, if you think of as Wonder Woman, where she has her legs a little bit farther apart, her hands on her hips, her elbows out, it's expansive posture. So what Cuddy found with that expansive posture is our nonverbal behaviors create our emotion. So she found out that the cortisol levels decrease, that stress hormones decrease, and our testosterone levels increase when we do that type of pose. And when our testosterone levels increase, it makes us more confident. So that's one of the principles to keep in mind is how are my nonverbal behaviors influencing my emotions in the way that I perceive things around me as well.
One other thing I'll bring up before we wrap up here, and that is my wife is reminding me every so often, not a lot, but every so often, stand up straight when you walk. You're hunched
Right.
over a little bit, you know. Now, my father, when he passed away, he did kind of walk like a vertical question mark a little bit, but I watched that in a lot of people as I walk the streets, whether it was in Phoenix or whether it's here in Santa Barbara. And I often ask the question of those who are hunched over, what burden are you still carrying? If you let that burden go, you might even be able to straighten up and sit up with a straight vertical back and get the energy flow. If you're familiar with the Kundalini energy, as talked about by Self-Realization Fellowship and Paramahansa Yogananda, or keeping the blood flowing, or stretching. I've heard it said that when we stretch, for example, like the animals, they just instinctively they know that that feels so good. And when we stretch and just really get things moving, it makes us feel so much better. Or taking that Wonder Woman stance. I think Superman also stood that way too. But it's really remarkable, and she reminds me to do that. And I hear her in my ear every so often when I am walking. And I'm going, okay, am I walking straight? Am I walking so that I'm not hunched over? You know, and obviously maybe over exaggerating the other way may not be a good thing, but it's not a bad thing because you're not going to stay that way. You're going to stretch a little bit and then you'll come back to a rested position and then you move on. So it's
But
interesting.
what Cuddy says is that it's a misnomer out there to say fake it till you make it. She
Hmm.
says fake it till you become it. So again, our nonverbal behaviors create us, create our emotions, and if you do those, then eventually that's who you become. And
Mm.
it's no longer something that's artificial or something that's you're trying to do that's not genuine. One last thing is you talked about deception, and we don't have time for that today, but maybe next time.
Yes.
But professionals professionals, police, interrogators, FBI, their accuracy of deception is only about 60%. So there's a number of things that you could do that I highlight to increase it much higher than 60% to detect if someone's being deceptive or not.
Mm, I think that's important these days, considering the fact that we have a lot of individuals who are disseminating information that that is, I'll be kind, is less than factual.
Mhm.
I want to thank you so much for joining us here on the program. Dr. Steve Furlich, he's the author of Sex Talk, How Biological Sex Influences Gender Communication Differences Throughout Life's Stages. And I guess we did talk about the life stages throughout the program, and I think that's important. The book is available at Amazon, of course, and we'll send people to that website, Amazon, to that specific book page so people can get a copy. It's also available, as you say, in Audible, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually think I'm going to now. Did you have a narrator? Did they choose a person to read for you?
Yeah, it's not me.
It's not
Now
you.
it's my tech. Now it's my Texas accent.
Well, we thank you for sharing your Texas accent with us here on the program. I am going to ask you those three final questions I ask all of my guests. I know I asked you about 5 months ago when we were together back in October, but I like asking again because sometimes the answers change a little bit. A reminder that this is Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We'll jump right into those questions right now. And that first one is, who is Steve Furlich?
Always trying to better myself and better other people through knowledge. So I always have unanswered questions that I want to find more information about. And I find it most gratifying when I see other people improve their lives from being able to share some of that information.
Mm. What gets you up in the morning?
One of the things is it's always in the back of my mind. You hear it, how harmful entropy is, where stagnation, how bad that is. So always moving forward as opposed to moving back, whether that's through exercise, through pleasure reading, through socializing with other people, small things, whatever it is, but always trying to improve and move forward.
Mm. And finally, what was your best day?
Best day. That's a good question. Um, Maybe when I received my PhD after all that long hard work and finally finished that long document.
You know, I have actually attended the defense of the thesis with a friend of mine, and I thought it was a weird thing that they phrased it that
Yes.
way, but that's what it's called, the defense of your thesis. And it was fascinating, where you either know what you wrote about or you don't, and it's not going to be that hard. It's not going to be that difficult. Not that they're going to make it easy, mind you, I'm sure. But I've often thought, boy, interesting to go after a PhD. I just have to figure out in what.
Uh,
Steve, thank you so much, Dr. Steve Furlich, for being with us here on the program. It's a pleasure. And yes, we will have you back maybe somewhere around June or so to start talking about this whole nonverbal epiphany. I thank you, and I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, video cast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Mike, thanks for letting me be a part of your life. Doug, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.